So we're going to talk about AI. So I'm going to scroll down on the homepage a little bit to AI 101. So this is just a little bit of a deep dive on how this AI works. So we use transformer as the type of like AI. It's called a transformer. And specifically, it's based on large language models like GPT-4. There's actually a mix of different AI models that are in Sudowrite. And basically the way these things work is they start out as this like totally random fuzzy noise that outputs nonsense. And when you train an AI, what you do is you send it a bunch of questions and answers that you know the answer to. And when it guesses correctly, you say, hey, reinforce that whatever you just did, like it's working. So reinforce that neural pathway in the model. Whenever it guesses wrong, you say, hey, whatever you just did, it's not working. Can you randomize your brain a little bit and try again? And so for the first, million or billion attempts, it actually doesn't seem to get much better at all. But the big surprise of AI in the past decade has been that if you just try and try and try over and over and over again with brute force, trial and error, eventually it gets way better at guessing the answers. And it's able to create representations of pretty complex ideas. And so, while it used to just be able to guess the next word in a sentence, like I pledge allegiance to the, it can now understand enough because it's so big that you can tell it your outline, and all it's doing is trying to guess the next word. But because it has such a sophisticated understanding of sentence structure and natural language understanding, it's able to actually understand, oh, well, the next word depends on what the outline was. And so what all of Sudowrite is doing under the hood is it's feeding text to this AI and telling it to guess what the next word is going to be. And the AI is guessing that based on all kinds of information that Sudowrite is pulling in the background. And so what this graphic is showing you here is that each word has a highlight demonstrating how likely it thinks that this word is going to come next. So you can see here, the night was alive with music of 1,000 stars. The air was filled with the sweet smell of the sea. And then it was deciding. I mean, not deciding, but there were a couple different options that the AI thought was likely for what word would come next. Maybe it was they stopped, like maybe they're going to stop and have a conversation. Or maybe it was they laughed. Maybe that was where this story was going to veer. Or maybe it was they smiled. Maybe they were going to smile and talk about something. And so in this case, the AI chose smiled, which only had a 7% chance of being the next word from the AI's point of view. And you can see that there's a few different places where it chose these words and phrases that were less likely to occur than others. So basically, each of these little red words is like a fork in the road where your story is diverging from another story. So you can understand how if you're generating like a whole chapter, for example, there's so many forks, it's like a fractal. And the longer your story is, and the more of your own voice that you put into the story and customize it, the less and less likely you are going to end up with text that's identical to what someone else gets. This graphic is showing how even very famous lines that the AI is very familiar with can turn into something entirely new. So for example, here we say, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Still, I'd rather have a name that's unique. So this is like a famous passage, but you can see how as the passage goes on, it's making there's more and more of these forks in the road. And by the end of the poem, there's this, minuscule chance of getting the same exact poem twice. And so this last bit is talking about how if you put in plagiarism, you get more plagiarism. So the way that I would think of it is that, you know, Sudowrite is kind of like a writing assistant. And if you tell your writing assistant, hey, here's the first paragraph of Harry Potter, give me the second one, the assistant will assume you have the best intentions. They can't, be the moral police for you. It's just there to help you and do what you ask it to. So it will, politely oblige and give you the second paragraph of Harry Potter. But if you give it your own original writing, you can see that it will. So see how this is all green? When it's all green, that means there's no guessing happening. It's all basically predetermined. And that's because the text of Harry Potter appears multiple places on the internet, and it's very clear what should come next. So whereas when you have original ideas in here, so for the other example, you can see this mix of colors. That's because I just replaced the names. Like I changed it from Mr. and Mrs. Dursley to Mr. and Mrs. Olivetti. And I changed the location from Privet Drive to Dorset Drive. And instead of saying they were perfectly normal, it said they were reluctant to admit they lived normal lives instead of proud. And you can see that just those few small changes, it completely changed the story. So the moral of the story here is if you make it your own and you customize it, it's pretty safe to assume that you're going to end up with very original writing, and it will be very unlikely to match things that others get out of Sudowrite. So that's a little bit about how this AI works and how it manages to output original writing. Any questions about that before I start moving into demonstrating the features?
I've got a comment.
Cool.
In other lessons, I've heard that it's advisable not to take a living author and say, I want you to write this in the style of Stephen King, and it's better to look up on ChatGPT or something and just say, what are Stephen King's hallmarks, what are his traits, and use those adjectives to define what you want it to aim for, and not to ever use any living author's name. If it's in public domain, it's okay. Is still holding?
Yeah. There's no law saying you cannot use an author's name when you're writing. I think that there's a question of values, like what are your values, what are our values. Personally, I think that what Sudowrite is all about is giving people tools and help to put their creative vision to life. So it's not about churning out novel after novel and copying what other people are doing. Now, that's not to say for the history of creativity and art, artists and writers have always learned everything is a remix. So I guess it's kind of a question of how are you using Stephen King's name, for example? A creative use of Stephen King's name I think could be interesting is if you're I want to write a children's book, but I want to see what happens if I mix this idea of a children's book with this idea of written by Stephen King. It's what would that even mean? So I think if you're transforming that original material into something new and creative, that's cool. But yeah, this is just about values, though. And that's about values and, how I think about it. But there's also a discussion to be had about performance. And when you use the names of famous people, sometimes it confuses the AI. So an example for this is sometimes if you write if you're using one of the image generators with AI, you might say give me a painting of a cat in the style of Salvador Dali. Sometimes it'll put a mustache on the cat because it has associated the mustache so much with Salvador Dali that it doesn't really understand. And so it'll just start putting mustaches in places. And so similarly, if you said, write this in the style of J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter might start showing up in your scenes, even though it's not a Harry Potter book. Because the AI doesn't quite know the difference between J.K. Rowling's writing style and just literally J.K. Rowling's books. So aside from values, I think there's, you're probably better off describing the kind of writing style you want, like focus in on action, describe like quirky characters and silly settings, and include lots of puns. Like these are the sorts of things that are more likely to help you out. Okay, so I'm actually going to kick off. This is Sudowrite 101, so we're not really going to look at story engine because it's kind of a whole nother thing. So I'm going to start off, and we're mostly going to be talking about these buttons here and some of the stuff in here too. So in order to show these things, these tools all require you to already have something. That's because these are really, tools for editing your writing and expanding on it. They're not tools for starting from scratch. The exception of that is the Generate First Draft button. So if you start a new document, you're always going to have that little link in there. I'm going to refresh the page just so that you can see what I did again there. It's in gray text, but right here it says Generate First Draft. If you click that, you get this box here. It says describe what you want to first draft of, and it gives you a few examples. So write a story where a detective named LeBlanche comes home late at night and finds her husband dead in the study, but there are no visible wounds. When she calls the police, they bring her in for questioning. So you want to give enough meat in here that it can expand on it. If you just write like a dog and a cat have a fight, it will come up with something, but it's probably not going to be very interesting. It's like there's not really that much there for it to expand on.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
Do you have an auto-record feature on this?
I'm not sure what you mean by auto-record. It does auto.
So in other words, a microphone that you could, instead of physically writing, typing, that you could auto-dictate, I should say. It's more accurate.
So dictation, we don't have dictation like within Sudowrite as a feature, but what kind of device do you use?
It's an option in Final Draft.
Okay. Do you have a Mac?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the Macs will have that as a feature for any text box. So you can use the Mac dictation. We're probably going to add dictation to Sudowrite eventually, but because it's already supported by a lot of devices, like phones and computers these days, it's not a super high priority for us right now.
I've dictated into it many times.
So then I'm just going to grab this mystery example because it's just an easy one. And it's writing a first draft of what I put in the prompt there. So LeBlanche, an intrepid detective, she's out and about. She'd been in dangerous situations, but never been as scared as she was in this moment. For a moment, she couldn't move. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. There were no visible wounds on her husband's body. He had been murdered. When the officers arrived, they brought LeBlanche in for questioning. She gave her statement, but despite her best efforts, she could not provide them with any leads. So now I want to show off some of these features here. So let's look at the beginning. She returned to her home from the outskirts of town late one night. She'd been on a case all day. All she could think of was getting some rest. So this description of the house in setting, I feel like it's kind of thin. So I can highlight it and click the Describe button, and I'll get some sensory details I can pull on. It also gives you metaphorical. And you can customize this with this drop down here. Anytime you see this arrow, that means you have an opportunity to customize it a bit. So there's sight, smell, taste, sound, touch, and metaphor. So you can pull on these. So, for example, she saw only the outlines of furniture and doorways. The rest was a dim blur. She eyed the quiet neighborhood. A white picket fence lined the street, and a faded stop sign post stood at the intersection. Cars lined the road. No one was stirring this time of night. I like that enough to put it in here. Of course, y'all probably have a different taste for me, so you might think that this is a bad one, but that's where you'll make it your own. That is how Describe works. You can use it on all kinds of things, and you can, if you highlight, you'll see you can highlight a whole paragraph. you can highlight just one word. It's up to you what you want to describe. The AI will just try to figure out whatever it is that you're probably going for. Another feature here is rewrite. So let me find something that I would want to rewrite. I don't like that she had never been so scared as she was in this moment. I think that's a typical telly prose, and I want it to show, not tell. So I can go into rewrite and click show, not tell, and hit go, and it'll do its best to rewrite that paragraph. Okay, now her heart is pounding, she's tiptoeing, her body's tense, she paused at every creak and groan before finally reaching the study. Okay, this is a much better way to tell me that she's scared than to just tell me that she's scared. So I'll paste that in. So you can copy and paste off of these. You can also click insert on the card and it'll insert the whole thing. But I find I don't use those. You can also copy these and then it's copied to your clipboard. And then you can, if you're doing stuff in Final Draft, for example, you can do that. So another thing that you might want to do is, let's say we get to this, police officers arrived, brought her in for questioning, she gave her statement. This is like very, very fast pacing description of this encounter with the police. And maybe for the story I want to tell, I want that to actually take up more time. You can click expand, and it'll take what you have here and basically like zoom in on it and add a bunch of extra words to it. So now it's talking about the detectives provided LeBlanche with clues. LeBlanche interviewed those who were close to her husband. There's hours of investigation. She armed, yada yada. So this isn't exactly what I wanted. So one thing you can do, like this is kind of, it's not expanding the questioning. It's starting with the questioning, but then it thinks that in order to expand, it's kind of interpreting the expand more broadly than I wanted it to. So a pro tip is that you can come in here and write, expand the questioning scene, without leaving the precinct. I mean, instead of saying without, because there's this funny thing where Sudowrite's kind of like a toddler. It reacts better for you telling it what to do than what not to do. So instead of saying don't leave, I'm going to say stay in the precinct. I'm going to write 500 words. I don't know how long it will go for exactly, but so I'm going to try expand again, and we'll see if it follows my instructions.
Does it have a maximum line? Right?
It doesn't have a hard maximum, I don't think, but it can go pretty far. Okay, so it looks like this worked. The questions continued for what felt like hours. Overwhelmed and exhausted, detective leaned back in his chair. So I haven't read this because I want to just kind of speed through this so I can show you all as much as possible. But let's just assume that this is passable for the sake of the demonstration. So that's describe, rewrite, and expand, but there's more at our disposal here. So if you want to keep the story going, you don't know what should happen next, and you really don't want to do any additional thinking or planning, write in auto mode will just continue the story.
Quick question while you're proceeding there. What if you wanted to do the inverse of what you're doing right now? Say you have something and you've overwritten, and you wanted to keep the meaning of what you did, but you would like it to be smaller.
Yeah. So that's actually a rewrite. One of the presets for a rewrite is shorter. So if you click here and do shorter, these are certainly shorter. It'll take a little bit more reading to know if they succeeded in capturing the essence perfectly. But that's something that you can use to do that. So where our story left off was that she left the station, her stomach was twisting, she was no closer to finding the murderer. Basically she's gonna go and probably look for some clues. So Wright says she spent the next few days poring over her husband's files. She went through his papers. Was her husband working on a case? So yeah, she's going through a cup of coffee. Spent every waking moment trying to piece together her clues. So let's say for some reason you're looking at all of these and they're violating some idea you have of who LaBlanche is and her tendencies. So one thing you could do is you can go into Write settings, and there's this thing called key details. And you can type in something like LaBlanche has a vast network of allies and informants who help her with her mysteries. She is eager to loop them in as much as possible. You can also customize how long you want these words to be, like just 50 words or 100 words. You can also change the number of cards you get. So you could be like, I want 6 ideas, but I want them to all be really short. And you can customize how creative it is. So let's make it a touch less creative. These settings up here, they affect all the different modes of write. There's guided write, and there's something called tone shift. The key details one, that only is for auto mode. And that's because in the guided mode, you're providing guidance more directly, basically. So it doesn't really make sense to have 2 different competing guidance. So I'll show you guided write in a second. So after filling in that info, it says here key details. So that's how that'll remind you that there's something under the hood that's influencing this. So if I click write now, then we'll get back 6 ideas, and they're all shorter. Now, how well did it do at bringing in the friends? So she interviewed her husband's friends and business associates, combed through files. Okay, it doesn't look like it actually brought in the key details very well into this one. So let's see if there's anything that we could... You know what it might be is that it's just too short.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm going to make it 150 words. I'm going to increase the creativity a little bit. Because it might be that lower creativity means that it's like very deterministic, like very predictable based on what came before, what's going to happen next. So, this mystery formula seems to be going in a certain direction, and the next thing she's going to do is look for clues. And so if you turn the creativity all the way down, it'll be like, of course she's going to go look through the files. So that's probably why all these cards started looking more similar to each other. So let's try that again. See if it works. LaBlanche arrived at her house, stepped back in the study, noticed a small scrap of paper. Husband's business partner. Okay, here's Alice, a retired police officer who worked with LaBlanche on several cases. Hey, it's LaBlanche. I need your help. Anything for you, her ally replies. So, in 2 out of the 3 cards, it had her allies coming in. So, one thing that you can take away from this is just appreciate how random the AI is, where 2 out of the 3, it followed my key details, but 1, it didn't. And we can speculate on okay, well, maybe, the cards should be longer, or maybe I should reword the key details to be more clear. But don't forget that sometimes if you just try it again, it might work. So when I get weird results, the first thing I always do is just try a second time just to see if it was a bit of a fluke. But over time, as you gain experience, you'll develop an intuition for which parts are just the AI being random and which parts are you've got some information in there that's misleading or confusing. Okay, so let's say that the key details helped here, but I actually have I have a vision now. I've seen Sudowrite's ideas for what should happen next, and I didn't have any idea what should happen next previously, but now I have a clear idea of what I think should happen. So what you can do is you can choose guided, and you can choose whether or not it will give you suggestions. The suggestions can help if, depending on how stumped you are. You can click refresh to just get more and more suggestions. But I've got a clear idea. So I want LeBlanche to call. LeBlanche calls her best friend, scientist named Piaget, to come help her deconstruct the crime scene. Okay, suddenly an idea struck LeBlanche. She reached for her cell phone and quickly dialed the number for her best friend, the scientist by the name of Piaget. Pia, she said breathlessly, I need your help. I think my husband was murdered, and I need you to come and deconstruct the crime scene with me. So, again, you can change the guidance to, you can say, in brackets, like, show, don't tell, focus in on the action or something like that. You can also use rewrite to, show, don't tell, or to change the dialogue to be less, I need your help. I think The great news is that it follows instructions closely. The bad news is that it follows instructions closely. So you can either write your instructions better, or you can manipulate the output. It's kind of it's a little bit of an art form. With these AI tools, you'll build an intuition over time for how much creativity do I want to give it right now. You're kind of like the senior writing partner, and you've got a team of junior writing partners. And you can give them very uncreative tasks and have them execute, or you can set them loose and let them do whatever they want. And depending on the task at hand and the vision you have and the story you want to tell, different tools will make sense for the task at hand.
Brian, when you said put it in brackets, where do you put that? In the instructions there under right guided?
You can try that, yeah. So the brackets are always just a way that you can convey to the AI that the stuff in brackets is generally interpreted as instructions, not prose. So if I click guided right here, I could do right in screenplay format. I don't know if it'll do this because the rest of the story is not in screenplay format, so it might not listen to me. Should probably pick something better that's like... I'm going to do something that's easier. Write tons of dialogue. And I'm just going to say write tons of dialogue. And we should be able to see pretty quickly in the outputs whether or not there's dialogue. Okay, LeBlanche, Piaget, LeBlanche, Piaget. It's almost like it remembered that I asked for it in screenplay format. It doesn't.
Well, what would it do if you actually put in screenplay format?
So it might follow the instructions, but it might not, because the manuscript seems to be... So when you do guided write, it looks at your manuscript. And if your manuscript is not in screenplay format, this is screaming at the AI implicitly, this is a novel, this is a novel. So it's almost, if I put in the instructions, write in screenplay format, I'm this very confusing boss. And I'm saying, write a novel, write a novel, write a novel, write a screenplay. And it's like, well, which one do you want? I don't know.
So for the sake of conversation, if you just simply highlighted everything you have, all the text you have, and said it, and asked it to express this in screenplay format, what would it do?
Well, when you highlight it, So rewrite can't rewrite that much at a time. So you can't use rewrite. This might, I mean, you could go like rewrite the above story in screenplay format. And then, let me see, I have no idea if this will work or not. It's kind of a weird way of using it. I'm going to make it more words, 200, it can only do 250 words at a time. And I'm going to decrease the creativity. And I'm going to remove the key details, turn it off. This might work, we'll see. So we expect it to begin with LeBlanc coming home. Fade in, exterior, LeBlanch's house, night. Okay.
There you go.
Cut to, interior, precinct, day.
Wow.
So that'll work. And then you would just put this in, you could put this in at the end and then kick it off again, and it should.
Did it write dialogue?
Oh, okay, it didn't write the dialogue. Okay, so yeah, it got the format right, but didn't translate the dialogue in. Yeah, so there's a feature that we have planned for the future at some time that will take rewrite and expand it so that you can do things like rewrite an entire novel into screenplay format. But that's it's probably a month or two out before we work on that.
Brian, if you were to write tons of dialogue in the essential box again, you think it would have done both the script type, or whatever you call it, and included dialogue in it? So you took that out.
I mean, there is dialogue here.
Oh, there is. I didn't read it.
There's not a lot. So it may be the case that it was trying to summarize, and so it summarized so much that it skimmed over the dialogue. But yeah, really what you'd want to do, I think, is to wait for that stronger rewrite feature. If you really wanted to rewrite an entire novel as a screenplay. Another thing you could do is use Story Engine to do it, but that would be pretty time consuming.
Why is that?
Because you would have to generate an outline for the story, and you'd basically be writing the story over from scratch as a screenplay. We don't have...
What if you just dump the entire text of the screenplay into it?
So the way that the AI works is that it can only really look at like 2,000 words at a time, or 1,000, 2,000 words at a time. So by dumping the whole story in here, you're not actually like telling the AI that much, because it doesn't read the story and learn from it, except at the time you run a function. So like if I paste War and Peace in here, and then I rewrite the first paragraph and I say, do more foreshadowing. It's not going to the end of War and Peace and checking for what happens and then coming back and doing that. It's just looking at that paragraph and guessing at... Now with War and Peace, maybe it knows it so well that it can do that well. But for a random story that I wrote, it'll just be guessing at what kind of foreshadowing I want, unless I put it in the rewrite prompt. I could say, add more foreshadowing that the main character eventually becomes the emperor of the evil empire, or something like that. So for now, our tools are mostly focused, they're kind of surgical tools for here. And then in Story Engine is another tool where you kind of go soup to nuts and you put in a brain dump and then you generate a synopsis and an outline. But you need to bring an outline to the party, and you need to create these chapters from their own set of beats, and that's kind of a more manual creation process. You don't have rewrite a whole book kind of a feature.
Would it be an accurate statement, in your opinion, that currently the product is more for people who are writing long-form novel or short story as opposed to screenplay?
I would say that's not accurate. Now, I would say some of the set dressing and the word choice we've used for the features. Okay, it's accurate, and there's some choices we've made. There's some defaults that are, catered towards novelists. But for example, when we were working on this Canvas feature, it has an outline feature, and the majority of the people we spoke to when we were creating this feature were screenwriters. I actually flew to LA and did a residency for a week where I worked for screenwriters as a junior writing assistant. And so you'll find the Hollywood Beats here is basically Save the Cat, but sort of adapted to what the AI understands. So you can see that this outlining tool is very much like a screenwriter forward interface. A lot of the other tools, maybe have naming conventions or defaults that apply to there for novel writing. But the AI, like the large language model, GPT-3, GPT-4, they've read, just as many screenplays as novels. Probably, at least proportionate to the amount that exist in the world. I don't think it's true that there's very few screenplays on the internet. There's a lot of them.
There's somebody in chat that says she uses it exclusively for scripts.
Cool.
I don't know who it was, but I just noticed somebody had posted that.
Yeah. So we haven't made a ton of custom features just for screenwriters. Obviously, the concerns are slightly different.
I really like the Canvas tool, but I can't seem to get it to work properly because I find that when you start trying to use the alternate suggestions, things start layering on top of each other. And if you try and move them, you really want to move the one that you don't want, but the one that was originally there will stay connected and you can't seem to get the new one in and the old one out. You just end up with a mess of boxes layered on top of each other.
Okay, I'll try to fix it.
Thank you.
It's kind of like a stack of cards. It's a little messy, but we kind of wanted it to feel like a cork board where you can really click and drag and make a mess.
And that's what I love about it. But I kind of need to be able to see the cards that I've chosen that I want in the flow, but I just end up with stacks of cards on top of them. And if I try and move something, I can only move the new ones and not the old ones.
The new ones. So here's a new one. Click, drag, click, drag. You're talking about like if you try to replace one of these, for example, or?
Yeah, because if you pick an alternate and you want the alternate, you really want that then to go into the flow, don't you? And take out the one that you don't want.
Yeah, let me just quickly see if I can show you how I would do it and confirm what the issue is.
Thank you.
I just put in, the world's smallest prompt for this, so I don't expect the plot to be particularly good because I didn't give it that much to work with. So you can generate, is this the kind of alternates you were talking about? This plus, or did you mean the generate options for this card one?
It's kind of doing it there, if you see what I mean. So, when you go to a box and you think, okay, that's all right, but I think I want to see what else it offers me, and then you click on a plus sign, and it will show you like an alternate plot point to put in there.
Uh-huh.
But then I want that, obviously, if I think, yes, I want that, that's better, how do I get that to then replace the one that I don't want?
I see what you mean. I'm noticing that there's a slight inconsistency. If I click generate options for this card, I believe that I should be able to like click one of these and drag it. It looks like it's not working right now, but it used to work where if you click it and drag it over here, it would try to replace that image. Or sorry,
Yeah, I've been trying
card.
it for a few weeks and it just stacks on top, which is not really.
Yeah, I'm gonna write a bug report that it's the drag to replace is not working anymore.
Thank you.
We recently upgraded some of the underlying infrastructure under Sudowrite, and occasionally that causes things to break that we didn't know. The drag to replace isn't working. I'm just writing a little note for myself. We'll fix it when we get a chance. I guess the workaround for now, unfortunately, would just be to do a version of copy paste action, which I know is not convenient, but for now, if you want to do that, that's your best bet. But we'll try to fix that. So back to project. I want to show off Brainstorm real quick. I think that's a bit more important than tone shift. So what Brainstorm is uniquely good at is like really pushing past the first most obvious ideas and getting some ideas that are really specific to what you're trying to do. So for example, I could say, give me a list of motives for the killer in my mystery novel. For context, I could say the victim is a professor of archaeology, and the tone of the story is very quirky and eccentric. For an example, you don't have to give an example, but I could say something like the killer is a rival professor who was turned down for the professorship, but the victim tamed. He could never get over it. It's not quite quirky and eccentric. Maybe instead of it just for the job, it's a rival professor who was runner-up for best dressed at the RPO. No, that's stupid. Well, this is the hard part about writing is that let's just nuke the examples and hit start. I'm not going to be able to think of one on the spot. Okay, there's a desire to avenge the wrong done. No, not like that. The killer may feel the victim wronged them in some way. That's like too vague. Revenge for a past injustice. Jealousy over the professor. These are all too vague. Jealousy, same promotion. I'll thumbs up this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit it. So instead of it being a promotion, what would be a quirky and funny thing? Something petty. Maybe it's like instead of an archaeologist, they're a paleontologist. Is that how you spell paleontologist? And I'm going to say the victim's colleague was trying to find the same bone that the victim had. And he knew the victim would get tenure for it. And he couldn't allow that. So now I'm going to hit refresh. Now that I have this new idea, and you'll see that the ideas so it picked up on my format. So I had jealousy hyphen. So now it knows, okay, I have to put the the core cause, and then an explanation. So it'll match a format, which is a cool thing you can do to, like, if you can tell that it's not taking the right things into consideration, you can put those at the beginning of the card, and it'll pick up on that. It'll be like, okay, I need to take these into consideration.
So is this just giving you ideas based on what you're typing in right here, or is it giving you ideas based on a combination of what you're typing and your story that has already been inputted?
Good question. So this is actually isolated. You're on your own little iceberg island when you're in Brainstorm. It doesn't have to be this way. We could potentially change it, but people routinely have like a bunch of different documents that are very different, and there's no clear indication of like what's the master copy or like what's truth. Theoretically, with Story Engine does have like a synopsis, which is sort of canon, and so we could potentially pull that in if you have one. But yeah. So these ideas are not silly enough, so I think it needs more examples. I can hit refresh again.
Along the lines of quirky, a stupid question. What if your writer is someone who can't spell?
It'll match that.
It'll match the misspelling?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, here, I can do it intentionally here. Vic Tom, Rar, Dinosaur, Killer.
Oh, but it'll point out that your word is misspelled.
It might, like, in the editor, but that's that's not Sudowrite. That's just...
I love it. I love that. That's
you
fantastic.
should find typos in here, if it doesn't... But it might not. It might have so many... You know what? I think that the AI... I think we upgraded the AI. In old versions would continue to give you typos, but then probably the new one doesn't.
Oh, so the new one, what you're just doing right now, it corrected the spelling.
I'm going to try include typos important to the tone of the story. I'm not sure if this will work. Yeah, there we go. So you might have to tell it.
Okay.
We got missing space here. The killer. So, that very valuable lesson: how to get Sudowrite to produce typos. Glad we have a recording that covers that.
and that is my gift for the day.
Awesome.